Today, my wife and I are visiting Colonial Williamsburg, an amazing living history museum in Virginia that tells the early part of America's enduring story. Come along with me and my wife as we explore a history buff's paradise. That's coming up next.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Goodness me. Is that how we are to initiate our time here together? I bid you good morning. I hear some few responses. The rest stare at me blankly. I look out and see only upon your faces a blank look of uncertainty and sweat. You look at me as though I am the one responsible for the Virginia weather. No, far from it. I well feel the heat just the same as you. I must confess I am not a soul of the tide water. I instead a man of the Potomac, born there, live directly there upon the river where you can find a breeze from time to time, even in a Virginia summer. Still blankness out amongst you all.
Good morning, Mr. Mason.
Good morning, good morning. Some of you, yes, I recognize. Many of you are new faces to me. Perhaps it is that which I have a greater preference for, my anonymity that baffles those here present. I'm curious, how many here are familiar with the name of Colonel George Mason? Some, a meager amount, more than I would like, honestly. And for those of you who have heard of me, I know what is said of me. I know why, if we have not yet met, but you have heard my name, you may be hesitant to interact. Yes, I know what my political adversaries say. They say that George Mason is short in temper, that George Mason is curmudgeonly in mood, that George Mason is sour in demeanor, that George Mason is an unhospitable creature, that George Mason is wholly an unsociable beast. Now please understand, all of this which is said about me is, yes, it is true. But from time to time, we must admit we are not one aspect of ourselves. Yes, I may be short in temper. I do not suffer fools easily. I am pleased to allow others to do work until I see them doing the work, see that it is a poor job, and I should much rather do it myself. Yes, some of these things that are said of me come from a place of truth, but it is not the entirety of the truth. No. When I am in my home of Gunston Hall, beloved as it is, I am the most hospitable host you may find. Amongst friends, I am warm, loving to my family, passionate about causes I believe in. It is my own son who has described his father as jocular and unbending. Oh, friends, if we are to spend the next half an hour together here amongst this Virginia heat in the air as close as it is, I should much prefer that you have the jocular Colonel Mason and not the unbending one. So let us all attempt to try that initial salutation again, and I bid you all good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Ah, much warmer. Now, I should admit I do not wish for much of anything warmer on a day such as today. No, I recognize that it is not the summer alone, the heat that is, that puts us all in an uncertain way. This year of 1776 has been a tumultuous one, an uncertain one. Why, some 6 months ago you could hardly hear men to talk of independency. And here now by August we have declared as such. It were some time ago, men, myself included, demanded we they wished not for an independency, but merely to have our rights restored to us. I said earlier that we are not but one aspect of ourselves, but we must recognize upon a much larger consideration. It is my belief that we are ever changing. Let us think of it this way. By a show of hands, how many feel as though they are the same person they were when they woke up this morning? Well, some of you, yes, raising your hand. But let us think, extrapolate upon that. Do we feel that we are the same person we were from a week ago? What of a month ago? Some 6 months ago, when we were all perhaps still subjects of the crown, not yet declared independent, yet certainly desirous, some of us, of such a change. Think to a year ago, at war with our mother country, and yet you could hardly find the word of independency being whispered in hushed conversations. We think to some 2 years ago. Blood had not yet been shed, but we had been at odds with Parliament and our mother country for a great long while. Oh, it is my belief that we are ever changing in this way. And stands before you a man who some 6 years ago, in a letter to a friend living in London, I said you could not find 5 men of sense in all of Virginia who would take independency if it were offered to them. I've changed my mind. But so too, in that selfsame letter, upon my conclusion, I admitted, yes, we owed a certain duty to our mother country, but we would not suffer to be her slaves. And what have the members of Parliament, the merchants of London since mocked? Look at those hypocritical Virginians, saying that they are likely to be our slaves, when they are the ones who hold chattel property. They're the ones who hold African flesh as though it were the clothes upon my back. I should answer to them. Who better to know what slavery may look like than the master? Here in Virginia, we have seen what happens to a people whose rights are stripped away by piecemeal over years, slowly put under boot. And to see it happen to us as well would not stand. However, I suppose if I put this forward, that we are all ever changing, that we are not stagnant or static, we must recognize, are we moving forward or backward? Are we growing or are we receding? We have declared independency in this year, but was that unanimous? Certainly not. There are a great many who did not wish for independency. There are those who wish not to speak of it, who are frightened at what it might mean, uncertain of our future. And yet we could not deny that there, in that moment, we had already been changed. At war with King's troops, the King's troops who, in the late war, French and Indians, were sent here to protect us, now sent to our shores instead to spill our blood. We were already changed, and there are those who did not wish to declare it, who did not wish to say it. They recognize that there are power. There's power in words that you speak. You may declare something, it may not make it true, but it does something. It changes you, or perhaps merely illuminates a change that has already taken place. Thus is the power of those words. Thus is the power to declare something, even if it is not yet true, even if it is not yet actualized, to conceive it, to say it. After all, we are at war. We have not won this war. Independency has been declared. But I put this to you. To declare ourselves independent, does that guarantee our freedom? No, not at all. We may throw off the shackles of an English monarch, but that does not guarantee our freedom. What if a French one were to take its place? Or a Spanish king? Or a Divan of Turkey, a Tsarina of Russia? What of a tyrant or demagogue of our own making? No, we may declare ourselves independent. But to realize our freedom, we must do more. Or already have here in Virginia. I apologize. I have lost myself already to high-minded rhetoric. It is, I regret to inform you, a side effect of spending too much time with politicians. I am a man who has long preferred the happiness of silence, the solitude of my home, over the troubles and vexations of public service, that is to say, government. I have long retired my seat there as a burgess, a representative of the people of Fairfax County, some over 10 years ago. But now I have a confession, and for the ladies who sit now in the audience, you may be unaware of this, but I must warn you something that will be a truth of your husbands. I entered into retirement from public service, and despite my retirement from politics, did you know that did not decrease my opinions upon politics? No, they grew over the years as the actions of Parliament became more and more egregious. I found that merely writing to neighbors, speaking to my representative were not enough. I must do something myself. My talents, I suppose, I only thought in writing. Thus is how I find myself here and now. I had come to the attention of a great many Virginians who were unaware of me before, as I was primary author of the Fairfax Resolves. You will well remember that we're here in this city, when the royal governor dissolved the House of Burgesses, our voice in government. Representatives met there at the Raleigh Tavern, Burgesses all. I was in the city at the time. I spoke with a great many of them. They were to send us back to our respective counties where we were to write resolves, here collected, that would then go to what they also declared for a Congress to be gathered, ultimately what happened in Philadelphia, the First Continental Congress. Well, my Fairfax resolves, I had written them. I took them to a neighbor that he might read over them, making certain that I were not too egregious in my opposition to the mother country. He, having supported them, ultimately as my representative. And so Colonel Washington came down here, submitted those to the people of Virginia, and all at once they swallowed up all of the rest. They, with little alteration, became the Virginia Resolves. The Virginia Resolves would go to Philadelphia. Once again, with little alteration, would be applied to that. Seemingly, I had found my way into the minds of a great many. Or, I suppose, I found myself in the mind of a great many others. They became the declaration of that First Continental Congress. I attempted to maintain my retirement, but ultimately would fail to do so. Twice asked to go to that Congress of Philadelphia, twice refused, citing that I had too recently lost my wife. I had a poor little family of orphans to whom I must be father and mother both. I could not go to Philadelphia. I would instead serve here in Virginia. I would do so for the 4th Virginia Convention, and now have done so for the late 5th Virginia Convention. Gathered there in that building in May of this year of 1776. Are you familiar with what happened there in May? A great many more blank looks. Either the heat has gotten worse, or you know not of which I speak. Or perhaps both. It were gathered men who voted unanimously to send a representative north to that Congress of Philadelphia with recommendations to that respectable body to declare these united colonies free and independent states. absolved of all allegiance to and dependence upon the Crown and Parliament of Great Britain, to declare independency. The first time. To look upon your face, madam, no, I know it were not the first time that anyone had ever talked of independency. We had heard of independent companies marching north to fight the king's troops, declaring themselves independent. Counties here in Virginia attempting to declare themselves independent. I have even heard talk that some of the colonies wish to declare their independency, but at present, the only one that comes to mind that might have hoped for such a thing was Rhode Island. Frankly, I've only ever seen her upon a map. I don't know whether she constitutes much more than a county anyways. No, this were different. This were to declare a united independency. Alongside of our brothers and sisters, all there gathered in Philadelphia. For the people of Virginia cannot declare the people of Pennsylvania free. And so we must wait. But those words were sent, the power to declare ourselves independent. Born here in Virginia, but not for Virginians alone. And frankly, that were not the most important thing to happen that day, at least not in my opinion. No, so too it was declared that a Bill of Rights and a Constitution be written. After all, if we are to do away with the old, what must you do? Create anew. Now, I must admit, I was not present for that vote. A smart bit of gout detained me at home. I arrived some 3 days later. And now I was immediately appointed to that committee. So admirable was its charge, though frustration in reality. I have a curiosity for those here present. How many have ever sat upon committee before? Even the young ones, have ever worked within a group on some project in your schooling? For those of you who are familiar with our conventions or have sat upon committee yourself, you'll be unsurprised to hear that our particular collection of men was, as is our custom, overcharged with useless members. Someone who sympathizes with me there. And now mind you, please, this is not to cast aspersions upon the integrity of the men there gathered. This is not due to the uselessness of any one or two particular individuals. I should say necessarily. I had not opportunity to meet all of them, and I'm certain that the law of numbers insists that wherever two politicians are gathered, at least one must be useless. Even amongst the apostles, there was still one Judas. Yes, I'm certain there were a few useless ones amongst them. No, that were not the sin of this particular collection of men. It was not their integrity, but its sheer size. Now, I recognize I am a man who has already professed my preference for silence and solitude. And there are those who do not always share a similarity of mine. I look out amongst you and recognize that there are a myriad of differing opinions. The gentleman over here, seeming about as sociable as myself, might have wished for a small number, some 3 to 5 men upon that committee, yes? I should think so as well. Why not write it, then turn it over to the committee of the whole? But it should not be the decision of any 1 or 2 men, lest we lose ourselves to a monarchy again. Looking out amongst you, looking to the lady here, seeming far more sociable than the gentleman and myself put together, might have insisted upon double that number, some 6 to 10, yes? You try our patience, madam, but I could have allowed it. So, do you think it were just some 10 men upon that committee? Oh, that should be easy already. No, of course not. Let us keep upping the number, some reasonable number, some 15 men upon that committee to write a single document. Oh, no, more. What were that number shouted? 30. 30. Some 30 men is exhausting. And had they stopped at that number, I would have been thankful for it.
50.
Not 50, thankfully. 36, all told, including myself. That is a third of the convention in its entirety. Do you imagine much was accomplished? No, we lost ourselves to 1,000 clashing and jarring proposals. when what was necessary was a few men of ability and integrity whose country's interests were first in their hearts. We had here an opportunity, change already happening all around us. But it were that opportunity to declare what this change would be. Who we woke up as the next day or a week from then or a month from then, would they be better or worse than we are now? Would we declare a world we wished to see? Or would we describe a world that we know around us already? We had an opportunity there. We waited with bated breath as riders rode to Philadelphia. As men there in Philadelphia even debating declaring independence. Here in Virginia, we had already moved past it. Instead, we had an opportunity to declare a new and independent Commonwealth of Virginia and what that might mean. To define the soul of this cause of America. To describe what that cause could be. I retired to my lodging house, not from the committee in its entirety, only at the end of day, there finally enjoying that silence and solitude which my mind worked so much more proficient. There I attempted to give form, to put words to these ideas. I wrote that all men are born equally free and independent and have certain inherent natural rights. Of life and liberty, the means of acquiring, possessing property, pursuing happiness and safety. That all power is vested in and consequently derived in the people. That magistrates are their trustees and servants, and at all times amenable to them. The government is or ought to be instituted for the general good and the safety of the people, of the nation, of the community. Of all the various modes and forms of government, that is best which is most capable of producing the greatest degree of happiness and most effectually secured against the dangers of maladministration. And that whenever any government is found to be inadequate or contrary to those purposes, a majority of the community had the indubitable, inalienable, and indefeasible right to reform, alter, or abolish. I did not stop there, just the ideas, amorphous, ephemeral, of what a government is or ought to be. Before any government was written, we declared those powers. We placed reins upon a government to separate the powers for the first time. Not all relied upon one king or executive, but instead that the executive, legislative, and judicative must be separate from one another. That the former two are made up of individuals elected into that position who at regular and free intervals are reduced to a private station, wherein they take part the burdens they have placed upon others. Here in America we declared, or in Virginia at least, that never again would you see hereditary positions. The idea that a man is born a judge, a magistrate, or a legislator is unnatural and absurd. And not just reigns upon a government. This Declaration of Rights also insisted upon rights for you, the people. Not just in forms of jurisprudence, as we have seen before, the rights to face one's accuser, rights to a trial by jury, those, yes, enshrined in there, but so too a free press, a free exercise of religion. I should say, I took my first 10 with the assistance to more of Thomas Ludwell Lee. We presented those to the committee, wherein once again they swallowed up all of the rest. Now, do not mistake me. If you had an opportunity to read them, the most published one was the committee draft. You will understand that Those original 12 in committee grew to 18 articles and shrunk back down to 16 sections, all through the magic of committee. They were ultimately ratified upon the 12th of June, but it were late May when they were first published in their committee draft form, 18 articles. But now we are faced, having a Declaration of Rights and now a completed Constitution. How we may make the world around us reflect the words in that document. For though many of them are great, they have not all been realized here in Virginia. And so, I stand before you. I understand soon to be appointed to the committee for the revision of our laws, that we may see an alteration here in Virginia, a Virginia that more closely resembles our new document than what we were perhaps a year or 10 years ago time. And as a representative of the people, I came here desirous of conversation. I restarted our dialogue that it might be a more friendly one, and I apologize. I've now found myself speaking at great length. I apologize. I have 9 children. You must understand that I have long since been taught. If I allow a word in edgewise, I have lost the entirety of conversation for the morning. You know, if you have questions of me, or of this Virginia Declaration of Rights, of this conflict of the last 10 years, or if you merely wish to ask after my person, my family, my farm, I should be happy to address any and all of these. I thank you, sir.
Colonel Mason, you mentioned at the beginning of your talk how we all are a slightly different person now than we were at the beginning of the day. Looking into the future a bit, how do you see our country and the world being different as a result of the American Revolution than how it was today?
The gentleman asks a rather heavy question of how I might expect to see a change, as we are all changing, as I had insisted upon before. What might this revolution change? Well, I think there is a great much that it already has done. Monarchs of Europe looked to England some 100 years ago during the English Civil War, where a king was deposed for not listening to the whims of his parliament. We are part of that continued existence, which may look back to antiquity, a struggle for the rights and freedoms of mankind. And just as those monarchs feared to look to what was happening in England at that time, less than 100 years, so too England now looks to us here, their knees knocking. For previously, we have seen bills of rights, but it has always been betwixt the government, that the members of Parliament, and that English Bill of Rights of 1689 promised certain rights and liberties to Parliament, to an aristocracy, and certain reigns were placed upon a monarch, to be certain. But we have gone further here. We have declared that the people have certain rights, and that the government ought to have certain reins placed upon it. This is my concern. We have declared it, sir. Next, we must demonstrate it. If we are able to do so, then the natural state of man being free means that those across this globe will be desirous of the freedom we now see. We are unable to realize it. It is that tension that makes me fear that we may slide back just as easily as we march forward. So I hope the change that we contribute to the world is an example, a betterment of the people, of mankind. But it is our actions, ultimately, that shall dictate such a thing, sir. And I should recognize, I do not fully know what such change will be. As I stated back in 1770, that I said that there are not 5 men of sense who would take independency. I could have hardly imagined the Colonel Mason who stands before you now. And as we have taken so much time to demonstrate to our peers, to the world, that our fathers' government were not our government, so too how many generations of our posterity until they insist that our government is not theirs. Thus is the nature of change. Yes?
Mr. Mason, you mentioned demonstrating independence and having this opportunity. Do you fear with the British coming into New York that these colonies, new United States, will not have any opportunity to demonstrate their independence?
The question is, with the news that we have heard from New York, that English Navy and Army, having recently been removed from Boston, now instead sets its eyes to New York. Is there a fear that such freedom that we have declared may not be able to be demonstrated? If the ways in New York continue, as they already have, certainly there is that possibility that at least in New York we do not see the same freedom demonstrated as we have here. It is my understanding that New York is a hotbed of loyalists. And yet, we understand that such examples of freedom can persist. In fact, some of the strongest examples of freedom exist most rightly in the face of opposition. The idea that there are men that attach us to the time of Cato, where we insist that we would wish liberty or die in its acquisition. That there is regret that we have but one life to give at the service of our country. Demonstrates that freedom can be declared, and in extreme circumstances demonstrated to the very end. I have written that I think that this cause will demand in some instances every last drop of our blood or every last penny of our fortune. But for those of us who think it worth it, then perhaps that alone may demonstrate, even if not actualized. Other curiosities or questions that I do not wish to, yes?
You are talking about rights, freedom, liberty for everyone. How were considered the natives from this country in terms of their freedom?
Yes, the gentleman asks a great question. When we speak of all men, who does that include, with specific consideration to the aboriginals, the native peoples of these lands? I thought, sir, what you were going to inquire about was the very first question that we received. What if the slaves should hear? A very different debate than that of the different tribes here. We must recognize that there is not a single monolithic American Indian. There are a great many tribes. Even within these tribes, there are differences of opinions. Here in Virginia, in every colony treats the native people slightly differently. There are some local tributary tribes. They pay tribute, still do, and will do so to the new government as they did so under a royal government. There are other nations that are considered their own nation, just that the Cherokee may be considered separate in a manner not dissimilar than that of the French or one of the German states. So, these ideas that all men being born free and independent are ones that we may apply to those other nations philosophically. I may believe that the people of France, just as the people of tribes out west are born in a similar manner free and independent as myself, but those are separate nations of which we have no control over. And thus, their ruling bodies may decide, however, to execute such ideas, free or otherwise. The other question we might ask is the equality of these individuals. There are those certainly in this world who ask if the African is a different creature than ourselves, white Europeans, that the natives, aboriginals, are different, that those of the Asiatic countries and nations are differing from ourselves. I cannot say that I have made a great discovery of it, but I have only ever seen evidence in my life to confirm that, yes, indeed, an equality of the manner in which we come into this world is equal. We will look to the African here upon our shores. There are those who compare them to the brute creation, that they are nigh on animalistic in their nature. I am a man who believes in tabula rasa, that we are all born a blank slate. And if the African is told that they are only ever less than their white master, they are only ever told that they are property and animalistic and to be treated as thus, then how can we expect them to act any differently? And so when speaking of the native peoples, I've seen what little I have seen. Of course, they're here often in the capital city, but I, not being a resident, am somewhat unacquainted with them. But I have seen a great many of them demonstrate the same capacities that I have seen of their white counterparts. And so, speaking philosophically, I think that it may apply to them. However, it may apply to them speaking in a civic form is one that we must, as we move forward, decide. Friends, I have kept you out here in this heat far too long, though a bit of breeze is enough to remind me. If you wish that a conversation may continue, I should be happy to continue it up on the high street just there. But I shall depart with you at this time upon this sentence. We now feel ourselves in the midst of change. I encourage you, whether it be daily or weekly, to look back, to ask yourself, have I done better for myself, for my country, for my world? Have I done better than the man I was yesterday, a week ago, a year ago? And upon that sentiment, I should wish to congratulate you on American independency, that we may together celebrate American liberty. Happiness and prosperity are well within our reach, but to attain it, to preserve it, must always rely upon our own wisdom and virtue. To that end, friends, if we are ever to meet again, I will forever be your humble and obedient servant, Colonel G. Mason of Gunston Hall. Good day.
Well, that's a wrap for this Colonial Williamsburg video. I hope you really enjoyed it, getting to see another part of this amazing living history museum. If you like this sort of stuff, check out my other videos. Check out colonialwilliamsburg.org to plan your own visit here, because it's so much cooler in real life than it is on film. Till next time, this is History Buff, TN Photobug signing out, and I'm having a blast with the past.